Namaste, everyone. Welcome to the Cārvāka podcast. This is your host, Kushalmehra. All right, today's topic is titled The Coverage of India in the West. And to talk about that coverage of India in the West, I have with me Atul Singh. Atul is the founder, CEO, and editor in chief of fairobserver.com. Atulji, thanks for coming.
Thank you very much. Namaskar, Kushal Mehra, Kushal Mangal.
एकदम बढ़िया एकदम बढ़िया Atul ji, this is your first time on the podcast, so I'll request you, let's begin like this. I will request you to tell everybody a little bit about yourself and a little bit about the Fair Observer too.
Wonderful, wonderful. So I will speak primarily in English, but if I do use Hindi, please forgive me because I rarely speak Hindi in Washington.
So, आपकी हिंदी जितनी धारा प्रवाह तो मैंने बहुत दिनों के बाद सुनी थी जब हम मिले थे.
भाई क्या करूं, गंगा किनारे वाला हूं और माँ मेरी हिंदी और संस्कृत साहित्य पढ़ी हुई हैं, बांग्ला साहित्य भी पढ़ी हुई हैं, तो उन्होंने जो है कान कस के बेलन लगा के जो है हम लोगों को साहित्य सिखा दिया. तो उसमें तो हमारा न कसूर है न हम ये कह सकते हैं कि हमने कुछ किया, ये तो धरोहर है हमारी.
बिल्कुल बढ़िया.
So anyway, so और वैसे भी मैं गंगा किनारे वाला हूँ हैं तो हम लोग काशी के निवासी, मूल निवासी, हालांकि पिताजी मेरे फौज में थे. तो anyway, more about me and myself. So as you can guess, I am your stereotypical UP wala. My ancestral village is not far from Sarnath, which is why philosophically I still am Buddhist. I apologize, there is sun streaming in straight suddenly. It's the angle has changed. So I will try to make sure that is the light better now?
Yeah, the light is better. It's okay. Yeah. We'll right. manage.
Okay, good. So now you can see I've changed the angle a bit. So I grew up around the country. I grew up all over. I was born in Vasco da Gama, Goa, spent time in Sikkim, Buddhist, Assam. So a lot of the so-called fringes of India, those were my formative years. And I could very easily have turned into an anglicized kid who spoke just English, as a lot of people who are children of officers do, whether they are army officers or especially if they are IAS or IPS officers or foreign service officers in particular. But luckily, my mother kept us grounded. And for all the traveling every 2-3 years, I got a very, very good education. So my father, in his wisdom, gave me 4 children's history books, British and Indian, Soviet, and American. That was genius. I still owe a great deal to him for this extraordinary foresight. My mother, of course, gave us a very good grounding in language and literature. The way I speak is thanks to my mother. And of course, my father introduced us to debating, and my brother and I both went on to debate for Oxford, but I'm jumping the story. Now, that's the good side. The bad side is I didn't do well in the Indian education system. I liked reading books. The Indian education system rewarded exams. I always struggled. I never got good marks. So those of you who have children who are not doing well, maybe they'll turn out okay. Don't worry. Don't beat them too much. Relax. It'll all be all right. If someone like me, मेरे ऐसा नालायक लड़का अगर जो है ठीक ठाक निकल गया तो आपके बच्चे ठीक ही निकलेंगे. So I was terrible. At 17, I ran away from home. Believe it or not, I went to Prayagraj. I went to, in those days, called Allahabad, of course. And I landed in Allahabad and I went to Sangam. And the boatman basically cheated me of all the little money I had. So by the end of the evening, he had taken, I believe, 300 rupees or something. It's for something that should have cost 10 or 20. So here I was, penniless, young kid, coming from Kolkata, because that is where my father was posted, knowing nothing about UP, cheated of the money. The cheese tins I had, which I thought, the army had, I'd been reading a lot of military history. So, because of course my father was in the army and I'm a Rajput, so I was fascinated by military, and I was fascinated and rather deeply ashamed of the fact that we'd lost all the battles. How could we lose? So here I am. I have my backpack. As a 17-year-old, I have my provisions. I think, I'm ready for a campaign. I'm a latter-day Kim, and guess what happens? The 2 tins of Amul cheese had fungus because you need refrigeration in India. It's too bloody hot. and you're sweating too. So some of that, so no money, no food, middle of nowhere. And as luck would have it, I ended up meeting some police chaps near Naini jail, and they took me in, and I was staying in police chowkis. And then so I have a lot of respect for people in uniform, both army and police. And so then I walked across much of UP. And that's a long story. I won't get into it. Then I came to Lucknow University, did English literature and history. And I mean, there was very little studying, a lot more other things going on in those days. And from Lucknow, I started reform organizations, yada yada, debated, played a lot of sport. I love sport. In an ideal world, I would edit less at Fair Observer and do a lot more mountaineering and play a lot of sport. But anyway, so my mother said, "What are you going to do? Get a job. We've lost all our land. We lost all our battles. There's no land for you. There are no horses and elephants for you to inherit. And you will be by the road cleaning the gutter if you don't study." So she kept hammering things in. My father, of course, was "What will you do?" And I wrote, as in those days you did in UP, the civil services exam. I came 105th in the country. In that year, in 1998, they admitted, I don't know, God knows, I don't remember, 50 odd people or 60, I don't even know, 70 maybe at most, in the batch. And suddenly when I arrived at the academy, I was surrounded by IITians. Pankaj Thakur, who's now in Intelligence Bureau, was there. And KP, Krishna Prakash, who's the superstar in Bombay, the IPS guy, he was my batch. No, I jumped. I went first to LBSNA. IAS Academy for the foundation course. And there I met the great Sanjeev Chopra, whom you must interview, Kushal, who's just written a book on the formation of states in India. So I met Sanjeev Chopra. He was my instructor. I'm still in touch with him. He retired as the head of the Lal Bahadur Shastri National Academy of Administration. Anyway, so I go from LBSNA, then I go to NPA. And NPA, I loved the outdoors, hated the hierarchy. The training was pretty crap. Outdated, ridiculous, actually. The outdoors stuff was magical. I swam a lot. I did rock climbing. And I ended up winning quite a few medals. I think I won all 8 individual golds in swimming. I also won the high jump, long jump, triple jump. I think ultimately I ended up with 15, total of 15 gold medals. I may be wrong, but that's what I think. I was fit in those days. I wasn't a cabbage as I am today. And then I went off to Nagaland. And after that, I did mountaineering courses. Of course, I did counterinsurgency, went native, ate dog and bear and silkworm and you name it. It was a magical time of my life. And I volunteered and did 2 attachments in Kashmir. And I went to all the posts. I remember I was the only one from the group of IPS officers who went to all the high posts. And I loved it. I loved every moment of being out and about in the mountains, seeing the very edges of India and beyond. Actually, I did cross the borders. 20 years down the line, I can admit they weren't exactly legal crossings. But anyway, we'll leave it at that. And then I thought, hang on a minute, I am implementing the 1860 Indian Penal Code drafted by Lord Thomas Babington Macaulay. Whenever I have to read about any tribe, I'm going back to British records. And I thought, what have our officers been doing since 1947? And the people I was serving had no respect for them. There was an IS officer who suggested that I take money. He was technically my boss. I mean, it was just ridiculous. He was the district magistrate or district collector. I said, I have no budget. He said, well, you have a chungi hai, jugaad karo. And I thought, hang on a minute. What do you mean? I really, my family has been a family of rebels. So, deep in my DNA, I don't do well with hierarchy and authority and the typical, Indian top-down approach. And I said, really? Sir, Turkon ke samne nahi jhuke, Mughlon ke samne nahi jhuke, Angrezon ke samne nahi jhuke. Aap hain kaun? He didn't like it, of course. Clearly, my days in the service were numbered because I didn't get along with my bosses. And I thought, man, my God, I mean, some of these chaps weigh only 2 tons. How can they even tell the soldier to go on a long-range patrol? That's a problem that has worsened. I mean, some of the IPS officers now weigh 3 tons. So, I thought the system was broken. Here we are in, after independence, implementing a law drafted by Macaulay, continuing with the colonial system. And I thought, hang on a minute, if I'm implementing a system drafted by the Brits, then I should go and learn from the Brits as to how to create systems, run societies. And I applied for philosophy, politics, and economics. I wrote 2 essays, one on the intellectual roots of the French Revolution, one on Nagaland, the Naga imbroglio. They admitted me, and not only did they admit me, they also gave me the top scholarship from the country. And here I was, a British Evening Radhakrishnan scholar at Oxford. And there, of course, I flowered, because there my argumentative self and the fact I like debating and outdoors, and all the Stephanians who were there didn't go native the way I did. And of course, I couldn't hang out with all the Delhi Stephanians. They were all children of bureaucrats, and I hated the bureaucracy by then. And we had nothing in common culturally. They were coconuts, I like to call them. Nariyal the, bahar se bhure, andar se safed. So they were all these coconuts, brown outside and white inside. So I ended up making friends with the Bavarians, with the Danes, I would go running in the morning with Matthias Waugh, my very dear friend, who's a Danish diplomat. I would spend time with Nico Leski, who's from Munich. So I made a whole bunch of friends. I debated for the Oxford Union. I was the treasurer of the European Affairs Society. Of course, the truth be told, I joined the European Affairs Society because there were so many beautiful European women there. No, I have an interest in Europe too. But the point is that I had a great time there. And then I went to the city, did law, City of London, worked at Freshfields, Brookhouse, Derringer as a corporate lawyer, too hierarchical, didn't enjoy it, didn't sort of find making rich people richer particularly meaningful. And I could see the economic system. Just as I had seen the flaws of socialism in India, I saw the flaws of finance capitalism in the City of London. And in fact, I wrote a big article predicting the 2007-2008 crisis. And I did a brief stint at Goldman Sachs. And I thought, look, let me go to America. By that time, I had driven across bits and bobs of America, particularly the West Coast. I had fallen in love with the huge landscapes. I'm an outdoorsy chap. And so I applied to Wharton, did my MBA, did a triple major in entrepreneurship, finance, and strategy, came out, set up Fair Observer, and that's another story how I set it up. But that's, in brief, my life's journey. It's a circuitous one. I didn't have a plan. I didn't get into IIT. I didn't get into St. Stephen's. I had no idea. If you had asked me when I'd gotten into the IPS, what would I do? I thought I'd be the first IPS officer to climb Mount Everest, and I would have been. But instead, my instructor, Atul Karwal, became the first officer. He's very fit. He's very, very outdoorsy as well. But he stayed in the IPS and he carried on the outdoorsy part. And I think I started overcompensating for my Rajput roots. We are not terribly intellectual, and I went off to Oxford and took the academic route. So my outdoor ambitions fell away, but c'est la vie. What will
Well,
you do?
we are going to talk about your indoor work, which is Fair Observer. So so tell me why use the name Fair Observer? Why? Because it's very interesting, and I'll explain where I come from. So we're talking about coverage of India in the West, right?
Yes.
And if you remember, हमारा इस पे WhatsApp पे भी चर्चा हुई थी जब मैंने
Yeah,
आपको
we've had long
मैंने
discussions. Yeah.
so मैंने आपको ये प्रश्न पूछा था. I had asked you the specific question कि why did you call this portal that you started the Fair Observer? So my first question to you was, why is it important to be fair?
Okay, very simple. You can either preach to the choir, you can go and give a sermon and everyone listens. Or if you want to convince someone, generally people are going to listen to you if you are fact-based and well-reasoned. I mean, you go back to Gautam Buddha. All right, Shraddha. What is that? That's a combination of both reason and intuition, the original meaning. And so the idea was that there is enough of polarization. There's enough of echo chambers. There are plenty of people in Turkey who are deeply interested in Upanishadic philosophy. Okay, it's not a huge percentage, but they are curious. Why? Because they think, it offers something different and new and thoughtful. There are plenty of people in Japan who are very curious about how Indians can function in chaos. There are plenty of Indians who are interested to learn about Brazil, but not through the eyes of the economists. They want to hear what Brazilians have to say. Similarly, there are plenty of Brazilians who want to hear what Greeks have to say about their economic crisis. There are Greeks who want to know about Kenya, but they don't want the foreign correspondent of the New York Times who sits in the posh cafe in the expat neighborhood wax lyrical. So for us, to be fair, was we believe that this instinct for fairness is human. And it is a noble instinct. We have lots of baser instincts. There are times we want to throttle people and then, jump on their dead bodies. After all, Bhim not just killed Dushasan, he also pulled his heart out and drank his blood. There was a reason for it. Maybe he deserved it, probably did deserve it. But the point is, that's not our noblest instinct. There is a higher instinct as well. And so the whole idea was that fairness is important, fairness is lost, and therefore, if we created Fair Observer, there'd be a global community of people who believe in fact and reason and engagement with each other, face à face or virtually, like the way we are. And we will agree on some things, we'll disagree on something, but hey ho, there we go, it's all okay. We'll learn something from each other. That was the premise. And the name Fair Observer there's no credit to me. I'd come up with something called Gyan-gnosis, and my friend said, it sounds like gynecology, you moron. And what is this? Pretentious Oxford, terminology. And his name is Vivek Agrawal. And I owe a great deal to a lot of friends in this journey. And he was an entrepreneur in Silicon Valley, one of those IITians. So not all IITians are fools. And it was 3 a.m. in Washington. And I was looking around for names because all the good names were taken, and I came across Fair Observer. I can't even claim credit for the name. Yeah, and it's like my second. I survived a few close shaves, an assassination attempt or two, and the second time I escaped it, I can't claim credit because I was asleep. So sometimes you can't claim credit. So here I am. I say I'm half asleep. I look at Fair Observer. He say, I'm on Google Chat. I say, what about Fair Observer? I had been pinging him for names for days on end. And he says, buy it. And then in a second or two, he writes, buy it now, you idiot. And so the long story short is that the name resonated instinctively, and it was validated by Vivek. And thanks to Vivek, I bought it. I think it was 2010, the domain name. Then created the company, or the non-profit came later, and then the journey began. But you need good friends who save you from bad decisions.
Well, that I agree on. Now, here's the thing. When it comes to Western coverage of India,
or any country, ask the Kenyans.
Yeah.
The Japanese.
To be very honest, obviously, but obviously we focus on
absolutely.
on India because
I've done my homework. I have lots of things to show our audience.
Yes. That's the good point.
I do homework. I work hard. I may not be that smart as you, but I work hard.
So ये नाम आते हैं, न्यूयॉर्क टाइम्स आ गया, वॉशिंगटन पोस्ट आ गया, वॉल स्ट्रीट जर्नल आ गया, अटलांटिक आ गया, आपका इकोनॉमिस्ट आ गया, मेन स्ट्रीम मीडिया में आपका CNN आ गया, या फॉक्स न्यूज आ गया, या आपका MSNBC आ गया, जो भी you have your
take your pick.
Yeah, you just have. But what the irony of it all is, like, if you look at coverage of American news and American policy on all these portals, you will see a diversity of viewpoints.
Absolutely.
You will see some people taking X, some people taking Y point of view. But when it comes to their vision of the, to use the word with a little bit of responsibility, is the Orient. When they look at the Orient, all these portals, doesn't matter which side of the political aisle they might be domestically, they all have one view. They all look at it in a standard way. And what we are trying to do today through this podcast, and I'm actually very grateful for the way Atul ji is going to presenting it, is he's going to show you examples. So having explained why we are doing this, now I hand it over to you. Ab aap kariye.
Okay, so thank you, Kushal. Thank you. By the way, Kushal, it's a real honor to be here because so many of my friends speak so highly of you. I've listened to many of your podcasts, and so many of my relatives have said, why aren't you interviewing on the Kushal Mehra show? And I said, I don't know him. Why would he invite me? Because, I don't have a huge audience. And there we are. Finally, my relatives will be satisfied if no one else.
चलो कोई तो satisfied हो रहा है मेरी podcast
Exactly.
से.
Exactly. So let's crack on. Let's crack on. As with everything, you have to look at history. So, Kushal, who were the people who were trained in English? Who were the people who were first trained in English in India?
Well, obviously, the ones who were in the Indian bureaucracy were getting and jumping on those jobs, right? The
So
elites of
hold
India.
fire. Of India, not even the bureaucracy. A few of them made it to the bureaucracy.
The
Remember
elites of
that
India.
the great minute, Macaulay's minute, 1853. I have it. I always have it printed out. I can get it.
That's
It's
okay.
behind me. But
I remember the minutes. Yeah.
the
I know
minute.
what you're talking about.
So the English-speaking elite of India is very coconutty. And the English-speaking elite of India, as Mark Tully said, he doesn't want to live in imitation America because, India is getting very Americanized. He wants Asli Bharat, not Nakli America. Great line. He's a man of the left, Labour Party, even a Corbynite. I mean, he supported Jeremy Corbyn, but to be fair, he's a man of great integrity. I greatly respect him, and he's a very nuanced man. He's not black and white, unlike many others. Now, and I disagree with him, and we constantly disagree with each other, but he still meets me if I'm in Delhi. Not one of the Delhi jet set meet me, because obviously I don't speak English good enough.
Sahi baat hai.
So, yeah, exactly. I don't speak any language well, and I have limited intelligence and even lesser ability. So why would anyone want to meet me? But going back to a very important, historically, before 1947, yes, there were a lot of people who spoke very good English and who were against the British, but culturally, most of the Indians who spoke English were colonized culturally by the British. The idea of Antonio Gramsci, a great Marxist scholar, of cultural hegemony. And I know some people will be horrified, especially if they're American. Oh, Marxist scholars are all evil and they have red horns. No, good ideas come from all schools and all different philosophies. And Antonio Gramsci asked himself, how come I'm in jail if what I'm saying is right? And how come Mussolini is in charge? And he came up with this idea of cultural hegemony, that people internalize. I'm being very simplistic because
No, I get it.
says people internalize their inferiority. And so that elite, after independence, 47, something worse happened. Nehru created a socialist state. Okay? And now, at least under Lenin and Stalin, the 5-year plan was drafted by engineers. But Nehru, of course, decided that ICS officers should draft those 5-year plans, even though they had no domain expertise in economics, because the reins of the state, yes, initially it was Mahalo Nobis, but eventually all power ended up with the heaven-born Indian Civil Service, which is today's Indian Administrative Service. And of course, its younger brother, Indian Police Service. So Duryodhan and Dushasan got all the power. And they would head things like Archaeological Survey of India, yada yada, but that's not the only thing. With that centralized model came a bifurcated state. The anglicized elite basically lived off the memories of the welfare state. They got the nice apartments in Chanakyapuri. They got the Lal Batti ki Gadi, the red light car. They and their junior partners, let's say the JNU professors, which came under Indira Gandhi, got all the benefits. The common people, didn't even get proper schooling. And India created linguistic apartheid. And the anglicized elite was A, colonial, and B, left-leaning. And because they were good at the English language, They were the ones who studied literature and history and politics and philosophy at posh places like Oxford, like Harvard. When I arrived at Oxford, most people there were Tam Brahms and Bengali Brahms or Bengali Kais. Most of the scholars just do a caste analysis of the scholars who've gone, Rhodes and Radhakrishnan. They were all Stephanians. In fact, the office of the Rhodes was in St. Stephen's College. I don't know if that's changed. And it was an open secret that if you were not a Stephanian, you were very unlikely to get it. And so they had the anglicized elite of India has lived first of the patronage of the British and then of the patronage of the Nehru family. तो जिसे कहते हैं ये लाल पट्टे के कुत्ते हैं. They are, red collared dogs in a way. Not dogs as in, I don't mean it in a pejorative way. I mean, I'm just trying to give you the metaphor, because they have to wag their tail to those who throw them a bone. That is the way things function around the world. I mean, America is no different. Fox is going to go one way because Murdoch owns it. MSNBC is going to go one way because someone else owns it, right? The Guardian is going to be left-leaning. And of course, the Times, owned by the Murdoch, will be right-leaning. So in India, there was no counterweight to this anglicized elite, which wields disproportionate power till this day, because in India, you're a big man if you speak English. It's a cultural problem that goes right down. Even when you are in a slum, you want to send their children to a private English medium school. English is the ticket to upward mobility and economic progress.
So you're talking about English being an aspirational language.
Yes. And so at the top, but then most middle class people, what do? The kid has to study engineering, medicine, accounting, MBA, get a job. Who has the material wealth to do something more fluffy? It is all the children of the bureaucratic elite, or the Nehruvian elite. And so let us look at who commands, who is sitting in Washington Post. Ishan Tharoor, son of Shashi Tharoor. Classic coconut, writes on India. So if you start digging, who is at Hudson Institute, the supposedly right-leaning institute? Aparna Pandey, Pavlovian anti-Modi Congress supporter. Why? Because daddy was probably in the IAS. Daddy got good postings. Look at Ro Khanna. Ro Khanna's grandfather was a Congress politician. Look at the vice president, Kamala Harris. Her grandfather was a Nehruvian loyalist who served all around Africa. So if you look at everyone in politics and everyone in media shaping the discourse, not everyone, most people, the dominant discourse is coming from a certain elite, the Macaulay/socialist elite. They define it. They define the view of India. And even the right falls prey to that, not just the left. As you said, that Ben Shapiro reads
Ramachandra Guha.
Ramachandra Guha.
You remember I told you that when we met in Washington.
I didn't know that. I learned something new. I don't follow Ben Shapiro. So, he's all right. I mean, but, I have too much to do and too little time. I can't follow everyone. And I'm not, I'm not a man either of the left or the right. I like good thinkers. I like Antonio Gramsci enormously. I even like Karl Marx, even though I disagree with him. I think his diagnosis of the ills of capitalism are brilliant. His suggestions such as Belluni, but I mean, it's just romantic. He is a German romantic, and they're very Judeo-Christian. Innocence. Everyone is in a tribe. Everyone is happy, clappy, singing Kumbaya. You have free love and multiple orgasms. And then, of course, you get private property, and then you get capitalism, and it's very productive, but it has internal contradictions. You need higher and higher returns, so you need to fire more and more labor, you need to automate, and then there's a supply side problem. That is not incorrect. Marx wasn't incorrect in his diagnosis. And the solution is the abolition of private property, abolition of the state, and all the workers in Soviets will sing Kumbaya, and there'll be free love and multiple orgasms again. But it's very simple. It's Garden of Eden, fall of man, and heaven. The template is straight from the Bible.
Yeah.
It is very Judeo-Christian.
Yeah,
So,
the Marx problem was he gave a very bad solution to a very good observation.
I mean, he is a genius. So going back is, it's not that I have an ideological problem. In fact, I always say that none of these chaps are truly left-leaning. They are what we call champagne socialist, or what the French call la gauche caviar. I mean, look at the wedding photos of Ishan Tharoor. They are over the top. Where did all the family money come from? Don't tell me that Shashi Tharoor is honest. Give me a break. His wife dies in mysterious circumstances, and the body is burnt very quickly. Give me a break. So the point is that this discourse was shaped by people patronized by first the British and then the Nehru family. And to be fair, Jawaharlal Nehru was a great intellectual, but over time, they became progressively less intellectual. And Rahul Gandhi is a case in point. And so what you get is a whole bunch of people who sing from the same hymn sheet. And so you get a very toxic discourse on India from Indians. And of course, the foreigners, of course, in these traditional publications are prisoners of their own history. Now, let's look at The Economist, all right? Began in 1843. Now, let me ask you, you've read John Stuart Mill on liberty. You're a man of great erudition. Where did John Stuart Mill work? Where did he begin his career?
Now that I don't remember. I just read what he wrote on liberty. I don't care where he came from.
So that is the difference, Kushal, between you and me. I'm always looking at context, and
Yeah, I
always
only look
looking
at
at,
the idea.
so difference between a historian by training. Of course, I've studied philosophy, but I always want to know, what did the streets smell like? What was happening on Sunday? Over coffee or a drink. Well, John Stuart Mill worked in the British East India Company.
Oh yeah, I have forgotten that. Yeah.
John Stuart Mill was in favor of votes for women. He was a man far ahead of his time. On Liberty is a work of pure genius in many ways.
Yeah.
But he felt that Indians could not be trusted.
Yes, I was just going to say that. साला उसके इंडिया के ऊपर views बहुत घटिया थे.
But hold fire. Now, why was he saying? And said, they, until they are in the maturity of their faculties, because of
They're
course
not
they're like
ready for it. They're
they're children. They're like these brownie fuzzy fuzzies. You can't really trust them. Come on, these brownie fuzzy fuzzies dressed like Mowgli in a loincloth.
Even Marx, by the way, Marx had some pretty nasty remarks on India.
I have his 2 editorials on India lying right here. I wish I had everything set up to show, but next time. Okay, next time we can do the Marx editorials and Mill's ideas on India. But the more important thing is that, was Mill just doing it because of philosophical reasons? No, he needed the British East India Company salary. No one goes generally against their economic self-interest. People like their bread to be buttered. All right? So this publication from 1843 to 1947 opposed India's independence. Why? Because Britain was making good money out of India. Why will you divest your colony, boss? Right? You're a young lad on the make. You come to India. At home, you're a nobody. You come to India. You become Lord Ochterlony. You saunter around Delhi on your elephant, and your 13 wives, each on her separate elephant. Life is good, isn't it, Kushal?
बहुत बढ़िया.
I mean, why did the Mughals come here? Why didn't they stay in Samarkand, Bukhara, Fargana Valley, modern-day Uzbekistan? Well, part of the reason was they would have to fight all the time. You come here, as Babur writes in Baburnama, the soil is fertile, the land is plentiful, there are lots of trades and crafts, much bigger revenue base. And of course, you can always have a big harem too. I mean, the emperor's lifestyle was phenomenal. So, obviously, they were going to choose the more comfortable option. And so The Economist, by its DNA, is a colonial publication. It's a wonderful publication, just as John Stuart Mill is a wonderful philosopher. But, and I love The Economist, but look at this. First, Modi is in an auto. Second, will he blow it? Will Modi blow it? India's moment. There's always that pulling India down element in The Economist, that we are still children. We don't know what is best for ourselves. We need to be put to bed at 6 p.m. We need to be given vegetables, and we need to be saved from ourselves. Ideally, in the past they wanted to convert us to Christianity. Now they want us to convert to woke ideology. But it's the
Yeah,
same thing. We have to
the
convert.
savior complex.
Yeah, the
It's
white savior
ingrained in the
complex.
Western mind.
It's
Savior
ingrained.
complex.
And it's ingrained even more in the new converts. Hindi mein kehte hain na, naya naya mulla zor se maak lagata hai.
Hmm.
It is even more ingrained in the Aparna Pandes, the Barkha Datts, the Tanvi Madans, and especially the Ishan Tharoors. They want to save us because they've been converted to the sacred faith, which has given them the keys to the kingdom, and they want to share it with the other, feudal, as you'd say, Samantwadi Rajputs like me, and the other, the great unwashed who didn't get a proper English education. We need to be saved from ourselves.
So this is very interesting. So what if I was to simplify this for
Yeah,
our listeners and viewers, is that
yeah,
what you're trying to say is that there is an economic incentive
yeah.
behind this entire
There always
India
is.
analysis of India.
Yeah,
So, and the economic incentive is laid down because the money is only. So here is the Western media landscape or the
yeah.
American media landscape, which wants to feel good about itself by saying, "देखो हम इनसे तो बेहतर हैं."
No,
Let me put it.
there's also one, they feel better, but there's a deeper thing. If
Mhm,
they control and dominate you, you will want to listen to them. If they criticize you and you get bothered by it, then you will try to
mhm.
do things to please them, and they will be able to influence you, and they'll be able to get policies, measures, all the other things more
Yes.
easily than they would otherwise. It's part of the great geopolitical game. There's a talk on YouTube that I've given called The James Bond Business. Kushal, you should watch it and your readers will enjoy it. That looks at this phenomenon at a deeper level. And look, where is the New York Times' second biggest market? India. Because India has a big population, a large English speaking elite, and a large number of people with an inferiority complex about their culture. Look,
Yeah,
there are
और
so many.
उनको नेम ड्रॉपिंग में भी अच्छा होता है ना कि
Yeah,
I
yeah,
have subscribed to New York Times. It's
exactly.
like a club membership.
Exactly. So I'll give you a simple example. Everyone talks about the caste system. And yes, the caste system was terrible. We lost numerous battles, as many of guests have talked. Abhijit, whom I met this time, mentioned, how the useless, ossified caste system, that division of labor, meant that it was only the Rajputs doing the fighting. And many of them were fat and bloody unfit. And they were, they would have opium before they went out for the cavalry charge. So they'd all go out, cavalry charge. Study the Battle of Khanua. Rana Sanga had 90,000 men and Babur had 10,000. But guess what? They were all high on opium. So once the initial charge, Babur was able to withstand it, boom, it was game on. These guys couldn't even think. Why weren't Brahmins fighting? After all, their temples were being sacked. Why weren't the traders fighting? After all, their wealth was being taken away. Why weren't the women also part of the resistance? After all, they were being raped. Nalanda was burnt. Muhammad bin Bakhtiar Khilji apparently used manuscripts to light campfires for 6 months. We lost our history and identity. It took Major James Prinsep to decipher the Brahmi script. And that's why we have the Ashok Chakra and yada yada on our national symbol. But the point is, we've had a terrible caste system. Sure, accepted. We've got to reform it. We'll reform it. But hang on a minute. What were, at the same period, were the Anglo-Saxons doing? California was offering bounties to killing Indians. You go to PBS, Public Broadcasting Service. I can send the link to the readers. Extermination was the word used. America, there are two stories of America. And the glamorous story is Tom Cruise, Top Gun, saving the world from evil, fighting the baddies. America, the land of immigrants. And that's true. You can come and make it. That's true. The poor, the great unwashed coming from Europe, the Irish found place in America, the Jews found place in America. All of that is true. But what is also true, that America was built on ethnic cleansing. wiping out the Native Americans. That begins as early as 1620. Now, my co-author is a WASP. He's a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, Boston man. Five of his forefathers' ancestors were on the Mayflower. 3 men and 2 women. He went to Harvard, played ice hockey, broke a few jaws, served, lived in France, and served in the company, the CIA. We do a podcast called The Dialectic by Fair Observer, by the Rajput and the Wasp. Talk to him from 1620 right down to the last major battle, which I think is 1896. I'll have to look it. So please, those of you who, if I get the date wrong, please forgive me. I'm getting old and I'm not on top form, and I should know that date. The Indians, the Native Americans were wiped out. You can talk to him about it. You can interview him, Kushal. He's written the book, The Interrogator. When Indians look at the West, they never look at the underbelly, especially the anglicized Indians. Every society has its problems with violence and stratification. Every society has to solve it itself. Now, when you have an inferiority complex, you're easily manipulable. And so you do things. Let's say you're a senior IAS officer and the CIA chap wants you to do something they want. Let's say you're super honest. You won't do anything. Hanky-panky. But guess what? As a senior CIA officer said, even your honest officers have the Dhritarashtra syndrome. Clearly, the bastard had read the Mahabharata quite well. Mm-hmm. And by that, he meant, even your honest guys, we can admit their kids to Harvard and they'll sing to our tune. I mean, I met the daughter of a DGP of Punjab, did her undergrad at Harvard, and then did her MBA at Harvard. She worked in some nonprofit in the interim. Didn't speak Hindi, had read the Ramayana and thought of Ram as this evil guy who banished his wife and upheld the caste system. She was a classic example of someone who will be an asset for the State Department, the CIA, the dominant Western narrative and paradigm. It's always a game of narratives, just as in many ways, and this will be very controversial for your listeners, Islam upholds Arab cultural hegemony. The Quran is in Arabic. Who knows what the Quran is in Nigeria or Indonesia or India? All right. You've got to read it in Arabic. You've got to go to Mecca. So you're deferential, no, inevitably, to the Arabs. In India, from 1192, when the Turks ruled, to actually long after 1858, the change in record keeping from Farsi to English was slow. Farsi was the official language of India. That's why you have the proverbs, Haat kangan ko aarsi kya, padhe likhe ko Farsi kya. Ye dekho kismat ka khel, padhe Farsi beche tel. What are all these proverbs? They show that Farsi, anyone who knows Farsi, is elite, educated, just as English is today. Yep. And guess what? Who has power? Those who are speakers of Farsi. So all the bright young lads, in Iran come to make their career in Hindustan. And of course, lasses too. The Taj Mahal is built for a Farsi woman. So cultural hegemony has great economic benefits, and the West has, it's complicated. But just the fact that James Bond movie does well or Top Gun does well in India, gets money to Hollywood. Just the fact that New York Times gets readers, they can sell ads localized to India. And if they get subscribers, even better. Same for The Guardian. So I'm not saying that they are evil, but what I'm saying is that they are a dominating culture. They want to dominate. And by shining the light on ills in India, whilst not doing the same not doing it in a similar manner on their own societies, helps them achieve that feeling of superiority and, more importantly, that Indian or Kenyan or Nigerian or Indonesian feeling of inferiority.
But then how the hell can this particular psychological state, because it's a psychological issue, I think a bunch of people who feel a certain way, and then it And I'm actually glad that you have explained why things are the way they are from a psychological perspective, is because then we know why we behave the way we do.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. Very important to know the why, right? Why are Pashtun boys so popular with Indian girls? All right.
Hmm.
How many Brahmin boys, how many Mishras, Chaturvedis, let's say even the Chit Pavan Konkanast Brahmin, how many of them marry? I mean, of course, there was one Peshwa who had Mastani as a mistress, and everyone was aghast. But how many Brahmin boys marry Pashtun girls or Muslim girls and they convert? First of all, their parents won't allow them. Let's face it. I told the senior leaders in the RSS that, why do you complain about love jihad? Why don't your boys marry girls from abroad? There are plenty of girls who are into yoga and Indian philosophy. It's your fault you don't marry them and bring them to the fold. But you look at almost every couple where the woman is from India, Hindu or culturally or religiously, and once she marries a Muslim boy, the wedding will be Muslim, the children will be named Muslim. Case in point, Saif Ali Khan Pataudi. Is he really a Pashtun? No. I mean, look at Shah Rukh and Amir. They are 2 feet tall. I have Pashtun friends. They're real Pashtuns, tall, hardy, mountain men, fighters. I mean, these city Pashtuns have hardly any Pashtun blood, but they all say, Pathan hu main. It's like, boss, that's the cultural hegemony that comes, any culture. You know what I mean? So in India, we have many layers of that. There's a very deep-seated inferiority complex in India.
Hmm. And I guess that reflects into who gets selected. So the point is that even when it comes to, let's say you don't suffer from this inferiority complex, then
Hmm.
you clearly are not going to get a job in any of these portals, right? Or
So,
companies.
how many times have you seen me on NDTV?
No, how many signs are anybody is anybody seen on NDTV?
Exactly. Is it that I don't know world history, or is it that I haven't studied my philosophy, or is it that I may just potentially be not very well liked?
So that's the point, right? So basically, there is gatekeeping,
Yeah,
and then there are job qualifications that
yeah,
are required, right? You have to toe a certain line, you have to speak in a certain way, you have to think in a certain way.
yeah.
The, once you qualify this, and in fact, this is something that I have
And
constantly discussed on the
no achievement can overcome that. I've given a talk at Google on the global rise of the far right in 2016. And yet, a lot of my friends say, why haven't you spoken in India? What's the problem? I said, I don't know. Maybe, maybe I just don't have the brains or the looks. I'm bald now. Maybe I look like a villain.
yeah. Well, आजकल being bald is in, so maybe
Oh,
you have
good.
a chance.
I'm glad at least there are some saving graces, Kushal.
यस सो चलो टकला होने का कुछ तो फायदा हो गया अभी.
So,
सो मगर अब मगर कोई स्पेसिफिक मुझे प्रश्न पूछना है. एक तो है मीडिया लैंडस्केप, ठीक है.
yeah.
एक है जैसे मेरी और आपकी वॉशिंगटन पे इस पर भी बहुत विस्तार में चर्चा हुई थी, ये जो फॉरेन पॉलिसी लैंडस्केप है हमारा, ठीक है जी.
Oh my God. Oh
ये
my
जो
God. Oh my
ये
God. Oh
ये
my
थिंक
God.
टैंक होते हैं, थिंक टैंक
Oh
होते
my
हैं,
God.
ठीक है. एक होते हैं थिंक टैंक जो जहां पे नेटिव अमेरिकन मतलब नेटिव्स ऑफ अमेरिका काम
Yeah.
करते हैं, और एक होते हैं उनके अपॉइंटमेंट्स ऑफ इंडियन ओरिजिन जो
Yeah.
उधर
Yeah.
काम करते हैं, ठीक है.
I told you they are coconuts.
नहीं नहीं, मगर पॉइंट ये है कि हर जगह यही सिंड्रोम कैसे हो सकता है अतुल.
No, no. Yes, hold fire. Think of the culture. All right. You're in America. You don't read any world history. You just read American history. Are you worldly? Not really. Do you speak many languages? Not really. Yeah, there are people. Yeah, I think one of my brother's class fellows went to Colombia, and he's a Tamil guy, and he teaches Hindi and Urdu, and he doesn't know either language particularly well. But the Americans don't know any better. So the anglicized elite, remember, please the British bosses. They know what to tell the Gora Sahib. They can talk the woke language. They can mirror what their masters want. Ipso facto, what happens is that they play the game. It's not that anyone is evil, everyone is behaving very rationally. and there's a certain class that does this work, and that class then establishes a monopoly, because the first guy comes in and then someone else says, oh, you are the leading expert on India, who would you recommend? So they develop their own feudal patronage, modern version of feudal patronage. And it's not just the think tanks. Look, what has happened in media in America is that there's no money. So diversity is gone. The traditional media names have imploded. In 1998, the Pew Research report found one of the Pew Research reports in Pew Research, one of the reports of the Pew Research Center. Sorry about being inexact in my expression. Found that for every one job in journalists, there were 1.9 jobs in public relations. By 2018, this figure had become 1:6.4. Today, it is more like 1:10. Why? Because the two legs of journalism were cut off. Number one, subscription, cut off. No one really, after the internet came, wanted to pay. And even now, people pay for the Financial Times. The paywall is a very new thing. And number two, advertising that went to Google and Facebook. So guess what? Who funds media? It's all very ideological. Who funds think tanks? The Atlantic is owned by Steve Jobs' widow. Washington Post is owned by Jeff Bezos. New York Times is basically run by the Sulzberger family. Let's go through all the names.
पांच generation की dynasty चला रही है उसको.
Let's look at a classic case in point. I want everyone to look at this. Can you see it, or the sun is too strong?
Unfortunately, the sun is too strong. You have to take it on your right.
Okay, my right. Okay, here. Yeah. Can people see it now?
Yep. Hinduization of India is nearly complete. वो article है ना?
Yes. Can you see it?
Yeah. Okay. So they'll know what the article is.
Yeah, by Yasmin Sarhan. Okay. Now, Atlantic, owned by Steve Jobs' widow. Good. Very many idealistic people work there. In fact, the chap who runs it, runs Emerson Collective, a Jewish chap in New York, is a very nice chap. I actually like him a lot. I can't call him a friend, but I really like him. He wished me luck for Fair Observer. But then I read their India coverage, and some of their articles are phenomenal. I have some very good friends at the Atlantic. But then I read their India coverage, and I see who's the author's name. Yasmin Sarhan. All right. Then I dig deeper. Where did she study? USC, University of Southern California, the rich kid school. Okay. Where does she live? London. Has she ever lived in India? Her LinkedIn tells me no. Her profile is open on my laptop. Does she speak Urdu or Hindi? Maybe, but if I was to bet, not very well. If I read her article, what does she say? India's secular and inclusive ethos is already beyond repair. It's like, hang on a minute. You're running Cārvāka podcast. All right? Cārvāka was a materialist and an atheist. Can you run this in Bangladesh? Can you run this in Pakistan?
Pakistan में तो पक्का मार डालेंगे.
No, Bangladesh is also bad. And can you run it under the Taliban-led Afghanistan? No. What is she talking about? Then she says, ethnic supremacism in check. We have a tribal woman president for the first time. What is the ethnic supremacism that she's talking about? The courts, the opposition parties, and independent media have buckled. Look, I'm pretty independent. I've constantly criticized the IAS, the IPS, the IFS, the BJP, the Congress. I come to India. Am I scared of someone chopping me up? No. Even people within the BJP criticize Modi. Even people at the top echelons of the RSS do so. Many say, it is a government run by the Indian Administrative Service with the outside support of the RSS.
अरे हम हर थर्सडे को मैं अभिजीत और श्याम शर्मा शो करते हैं जिसमें आधे मीम मोदी के ऊपर होते हैं.
Right. You're not being beaten up. Your bones are not being broken up. Can I go to Saudi Arabia? No, I dare not, because I've criticized Mohammed bin Salman. In 2016, 3rd January, I wrote an article, There's Something Rotten in Saudi Arabia, in which I talk about sex, drugs, and rock and roll behind the official pieties of the state. I talk about how many people they execute, yada, yada. If I go there, even as a foreigner, guess what? I'm not British. I won't have the protection in the immunity. So who are the people she's quoting? She's quoting someone from the Indian American Muslim Council, Ajit Sahi. Okay, maybe he's right. Then she says that Hindu nationalist groups and BJP lawmakers claim that forced conversions are rampant in the country, but there is little evidence for this. She says, she dismisses it one line. Hang on a minute. How did so many Indians convert? Was it all by peace and love? And let's assume it wasn't forced. There was a degree of influence. There's a degree of manipulation. I served in Nagaland. I just mentioned that. It's an American Baptist state with prohibition. And guess what? What's the biggest industry? Bootlegging. It's a tribal culture. Everyone drinks. Even the pastors drink. How did it become American Baptist? Was it all lovey-dovey? No. They are now training many local tribesmen to go on crusades, 3-day crusades. Is the idea of a crusade such a nice one? Ask the poor Muslims who have suffered. So, I mean, the point is that, well, I understand. And then she says, Shah Rukh Khan's son has been, targeted and yada, yada. And the point is that she doesn't have local knowledge, but she went to the top school. She's articulate. She went into the media. Perhaps her Muslim background affects her thinking. And she's done a hatchet job on India. And the challenge.
I think इस केस में क्या हो गया ना, शाहरुख खान वो आर्यन का अरेस्ट हो गया ना, उसने शाहरुख की पिक्चरें देखी होगी, उसका दिल टूट गया उसके बाद.
Joby, but the point is, this is normal. Who do you think is the international opinions editor at the New York Times? Tell me the name.
International opinions editor. मैं नाम
Or
भूल गया उसका.
a key position, Basharat Peer.
हाँ, Basharat Peer. आपने अभी बोला था मुझे. हाँ,
yeah.
Basharat
like
Peer.
I met someone. I met someone who's no longer at a Bloomberg conference. His name will come to me in a second. He had to leave because he published a Republican. And he asked me to write something on Brexit. He put me in touch with Basharat. Basharat says, and by the way, I've written a book chapter on Brexit. I've written, because I debated with a lot of people who are now in politics. I know Britain very well. I did British politics under Michael Hart, who also taught a chap called David Cameron before me. And so they said, oh, we have plenty of writers for Britain. You should write on India. But then he says there are plenty of writers on India. Maybe you should write for the Indian Express. He was patronizing. He was insulting. And he was downright dismissive. Ironically, his boss, who was a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, was welcoming and, yes, your ideas on Britain are brilliant. You have such great insight. But this chap clearly will never publish me for religious or ideological reasons. He's a Kashmiri. Forget it. The gate is shut. Unless, some American who is, Jewish or WASPy or any ethnicity, doesn't matter, opens the door for me in a key position. So these gates are all shut, and the American ignorance leads to this.
But this gatekeeping, now, okay, then I'll just, because see, someone in the live viewership has asked this question. So let's just jump into that because it's a perfect segue into what you've just said. So someone has asked, does Atulji think at some point the think tanks, news channels will be forced to call the Indian non-left? Because primarily whom they call is people from the Indian left or people who are loosely in India understood to be left-wingers.
The answer is, who knows? Now there is division. Why will they be forced to? They are preaching to their choir. They have their church. MSNBC is washed by lefties. They don't care about anyone else. They've got to keep the outrage engine going. It's the privilege of outrage. So they'll invite elite Indians with good English who lived off their families lived off the patronage of the British, and then and then the Nehru dynasty, and the song and dance will go on. Why bother? Why are you so bothered about them? I don't expect to be invited by any think tank to speak on India in Washington, ever.
Okay, but so the next part of the question was there was a rationale behind it. They say because maybe in the future they may not have any credibility or option
They
left
already
as
have no credibility.
yeah.
Brookings runs after money. All these
Mhm.
think tanks, they are like, who has watched Sholay?
शोले
Remember?
तो सबने देखी है.
Ha, Mehbooba, Mehbooba, Helen is dancing. So they are
हाँ.
like all these think tanks are like Helen's dancing before Gabbar.
Mhm.
They
No,
have
but
no
do you think
credibility.
with India's changing economic might, the more economically powerful India becomes, things might change?
The answer is yes and no, because look, America became very economically powerful after World War One, but it took
Mm-hmm.
World War II for it to emerge as a global superpower and for American narrative to dominate. There's a time lag. India will have to um, tell its story better. I mean, after all, look, what are all these religions? In a way, they are stories. Uh, Islam told its story better, and therefore people converted. People saw hope in it. People saw salvation in it. People saw community in it.
Mm-hmm.
In stratified societies, people could stand shoulder to shoulder and pray together. So I treat Islam as early socialism. And in fact, so is Christianity. Blessed are the poor. And yes, as always happens, once it became socialist, the if you read Candide, the Grand Inquisitor also wants to abuse his power and sleep with Cunegonde. So the reality is, everyone in power discovers they love money, and the Samajwadi Party in India is not really Samajwadi Party. It's a party where Mulayam Singh Yadav and Akhilesh Yadav enjoy wine, women, and song. Uh, Behind closed doors, perhaps not openly, but they have a fortune. So what happens when socialism comes is a different reality. The princelings of the Chinese Communist Party are a case in point. But the ideal was a very powerful ideal. The story was a great idea, a story. And so it's up to Indians to tell their stories. At one point, Zen comes from the word dhyan. There's a lecture on Buddhism by Srinivas Reddy. You can listen to it on our YouTube channel, which you should subscribe, by the way. I'm making a plug for it right now because we need more subscribers to show up in search, and we have a lot of good content, a lot of great content, actually. But going to the key point is yes, you have money, but you've got to tell your story. Right now, who joins the Indian Foreign Service? Everyone writes the civil services exam. How many people? 1 million now? Write it every year. 10 lakh, 10 lakhs probably. And
10 लाख
so
भी कम ही होंगे, ज्यादा लोग लिखते
more.
होंगे मुझे
Okay,
लगता है.
huge numbers. Okay. Guess what? Everyone wants the IAS because it's an open secret. If you're an IAS officer, you'll have a net worth of 100 crores. IAS officers are the modern day Mahants of India. They are the elite of the elite. They have the wisdom to head everything. They will head the Central Board of Secondary Education, and their children will study in America. They won't study in CBSE schools. That's the hypocrisy of it. They will send their children to IB, International Baccalaureate, but they'll be in charge of CBSE. They will be in charge of HRD. They will also be in charge of Finance Ministry, even though they may have studied English literature at Lady Shri Ram College, or so on and so forth. It's absurd. So what happens is everyone writes the civil services exam. There's only one prize, the IAS. Everything else is a consolation prize. So the chap who goes to the Foreign Service thinks, oh, if I had 5 more marks, I'd have been in the IAS. And the exam has no relevance to the job. Most of the IFS officers can't speak, are not good at picking up other languages, have their arranged marriages, only hang out with Indian Americans when in America, or Indians in whichever country they're posted, cannot, tell, to use words from Blackadder, this great British comedy, tell their ass from their elbow. And then you wonder, hang on a minute, why can't India present its point of view? And of course, the foreign minister speaks well, and he's won a lot of kudos. He does stand his ground. But think of it this way: there's no machinery behind him. Doordarshan gets 1,300 crores a year. It's money down the drain. DD International is useless. Al Jazeera, brilliant shop. Lots of British people work there. They hired the best talent. They know what to do. BBC, of course, goes without saying. They are in every language. They open in 4 languages: Telugu, Gujarati, and
हिंदी
two
में भी
more.
हैं.
Hindi mein
हिंदी
to
में.
arse se hain. They've been in Hindi forever. I mean,
Hmm.
Mark Tully speaks to my mother in Hindi, something that Pranay Roy would never do. So the reality is that yes, you have money that is necessary but not sufficient. The discourse will change when you tell your story. And once you did, Angkor Wat is in Cambodia. Borobudur is in Indonesia. The Thai National Ballet performs the Ramayana. Of course, Hanuman, and I have a Hindi video on my own personal channel that talks about the Ramayana. The Thai Hanuman is a bit of a ladies' man. He arrives in Ashok Vatika and forgets that he's there to rescue Sita, and he gets distracted by the lovely lissom lasses there. But it's a different version to ours, but it is our story. So the big Bamiyan Buddhas were a product of Indian civilization. So you've got to tell your story convincingly, and the atmosphere is ripe. I'll give you a classic example. Everyone is doing yoga. At MIT, half my friends, physicists, mathematicians, are meditating. The zeitgeist in the intellectual elite is already pro-India now, culturally. I mean, and guess what? We did the International Yoga Day. It was a complete waste of money. First of all, only Indians showed up. I mean, why isn't every beautiful girl who works on Capitol Hill there? And if she will be there, everyone else will be there. All right? Why, do you make these unending speeches, and why do you have to show loud videos? India, the land of yada yada. I mean, chill out. People have come for yoga, for a relaxing time. The ambassador grabs the mic and cannot let go. He's eating it as if it's a banana. I could be ruder, but I don't want to use that language here. But the point is that here you have a complete waste of time and energy and money on and the squandering of a great idea. This could be a great occasion to you build soft power. Every yoga studio should be there. You can ask some, famous yoga lady to conduct a beginner's class from Hollywood. She'd come, she'd fly over. Oh, what a great honor. But our diplomats do not understand basics. I've lived in Washington for over 10 years. First of all, they shouldn't be in the diplomacy. The exam recruit puts square pegs in round holes. They don't have the personality to be diplomats. Second of all, they don't have any interest to be diplomats. They are living a life of regret. They wanted to be in the IAS. They didn't get it. So India's institutions are broken. And culturally, we don't care. Deep down, it's our fault. We whine and whine and whine. Look, Indian Americans are now the highest paid ethnic minority, or one of the highest paid or highest earning. The per capita income is better than others. You can't play the victim card. Get over it. You want to tell your story? All right. Write editorials. Fair Observer is open. But I'll tell you, when we get editorials from Indians, they're emotional, poor sentence formulation. They don't hyperlink. They don't do their work. They're not interested in telling their story. Indians may whine, but they don't really put in the work here. They are too busy in their day-to-day jobs, moving up the corporate ladder, getting their kids into, say, Thomas Jefferson High School. And that's their focus. So if that's the focus, don't complain.
ओके, ये प्रश्न बहुत अच्छा है, एंड आई थिंक ये इंडियन पर्सपेक्टिव से बहुत जरूरी है कि ये इट्स ऑन नेशनलिज्म, एंड आई विल एक्सप्लेन व्हाई. अगेन, इट इज डायरेक्टली लिंक्ड टू द कवरेज ऑफ इंडिया. सी, I don't know if you remember this famous interview of Modi ji where he said, I am a Hindu and I am a nationalist and I see nothing wrong in it. I don't know if you remember.
No, I do
Modi
remember. I didn't like the defensive. Indians are too defensive. Even that, there's nothing wrong. Why do you even have to use that line?
Yeah,
that shows
so
a defensiveness. We
but the
always
point
say,
here
oh,
is,
there's nothing wrong. You
so
don't
मोदी
need
जी
to
ने
say
ये
that.
कहा था, मोदी जी ने ये कहा था. So but the thing is, जब वेस्टर्न मीडिया कवर करती है ना, तो मुझे बहुत हंसी आती है एक्चुअली. मतलब Hindu nationalist government is in power
Hindu
now.
fascist is the term.
They also use Hindu nationalist. Many
Yeah,
times
but
they've used the word Hindu nationalist.
yeah.
Now every time they use the word Hindu nationalist, the Indian must be looking at the paper and is like, ये इसकी गाली है. ये मुझे गाली दे रहा है.
No,
मैं
but
तो हूँ.
but here's the thing. This is where we have to look at the world from another prism.
हाँ, तो
I think
यही मैं कह रहा हूँ. So why do Westerners, तो प्रश्न ये था किसी का कि why do Westerners think nationalism means far right?
so. This is where and I don't want to offend anyone. So all
नहीं नहीं,
the
प्लीज ऑफेंड करें,
listeners,
उससे क्या फर्क पड़ता है.
I think again it goes back to the Indian insularity. Why did and I have a great sense of shame. I'll be honest to admit that as a Rajput we lost our battles and in a way facilitated the takeover of India the way it happened. If we had fought well, Nalanda wouldn't have burnt. Let's be honest. Now that happened a long time ago, but we repeated our mistakes again and again and again, and we are still repeating them. We are too insular. I think the great bane of India, part of the great, the great weaknesses of Indian society is that intra-caste marriage. Imagine a diplomat who gets through the civil services exam, comes from, you know, whatever community, he marries within the caste. He doesn't even know another region, another caste. How will he engage with another culture? So you've got to put yourself in the shoes of another. What they are doing is, it's not gali. This is again a wrong way to look at it. They are giving you a term, and the term is Hindutva, Hinduization. Hinduization means that there is no space for other people. That is what that term means. Hinduization means that minorities are oppressed, Muslims are being pushed. She quotes some Muslim chap who is in All India Institute of Medical Sciences, who says there's no space, he's afraid to display his religion. What it connotes is that a form of final solution is being planned at its most sinister. Remember all this talk about Citizenship Amendment Act and internship camps, and there'd be concentration camps for Muslims. So the narrative is that Hinduization or Hindutva is fundamentally inspired by Nazi ideas of racial purity and ethnic homogeneity, which is impossible in India. I mean, impossible, first of all, but that's beside the point. And just as Nazism became a bad word, so has Hindutva. It's basically a worse word than Islamism in many circles. So what they've done very, very cleverly is tarred you. In fact, the very word Hindu is of Arab origin. I don't use it ever. I never use it. Why will I define myself with the word created by an invader who said, oh, those who live west of Indus, Al-Hind, are Hindu? Right? Sindhu was the river. I am a Ganga Kinare wala hu bhai. I'm from the Gangetic faiths. And we have both an austere tradition like Jainism. We have materialism like the Cārvāka atheist tradition. We also have, the tradition of the census. We are also a land of Kama Sutra. My grandmother is a Chandel. They built the Khajuraho temples. I'm very proud of that. Long before Hollywood was selling, tales of sensuousness and the French had the monopoly on sexiness, it was us. So, we are a plural culture. We are a multicultural culture. No two people in the same family may worship the same gods. The stories are beautiful. I always say, look at Ganesh, the story of Ganesh. Why is it important? Well, who creates Ganesh? Parvati. She breathes life into it. So it is not just a male god with a white beard as in Sistine Chapel, who's the source of life. Think of it. It's a very powerful story. It's the power of Parvati, who's the daughter of the Himalayas, Parvat. Of course, Shiv comes, accidentally chops his head off. Parvati loses it. What did you do? Shiv sends, his guns, and they find a baby elephant, bring back the baby elephant, and he has the head of an elephant. And of course, then he bites a laddu and breaks his tooth. And of course, the story of the mouse who becomes his, the elephant rides the mouse. But the story is magical because even the God of good beginnings, I write, Om Ganeshaya Namah, even the God of good beginnings began by losing his life, began life with an utter disaster. And he's fallible. He's greedy. He breaks his teeth. But he's imaginative. He's the God of writing. He's the God of wisdom. He's the God of judgment. And so for me, the story of Ganesh ties me to the environment. The elephant and the mouse are as much a part of me as much a part of nature as I am. I'm not superior. It's very similar to the Native American faiths, and I'm very proudly pagan. I prefer the pagan faiths to the Hebraic ideologies and religions. I do. So for me, these myths are profound, magical, wonderful. They are part of my identity. Now, does that mean that I buy into the corruption of let's say the Sankat Mochan temple in my ancestral town, where the Mahant is the son of the Mahant and his father was the Mahant, and he's basically a fat fellow who takes bribes and steals the temple's money? Of course not. I would be the first to say we have to reform our temples. It shouldn't just be a monopoly of the Brahmins. It shouldn't pass from father to son, by the way, which was a British idea, because they were trying to create, a patronage network. So the Rajputs they backed were the ones, and the ruling families they backed were the ones who betrayed them who betrayed their own people in 1857. My family was on the rebel side. There is no land that I have inherited. We were on the losing side of history. But Scindia knifed Rani Lakshmibai in the back. Does he have his palace? Yes. All the princes of Rajasthan, why do they have their palaces? Because I always say, Gaddar ki aulad ऐश करते हैं हिंदुस्तान में, और हम उनको जो है सिजदा करते हैं उनके सामने. We never had our French Revolution that we chopped off heads on guillotines. So we have a comprador elite, both amongst the aristocracy and the priesthood. And we have to change that. We've got to change that. But we have to do it ourselves. My point is that this is what I'm getting at. The word Hinduization is given a very pejorative meaning so that you look down on yourself or you react in a thin-skinned way. You've got to look at it. What is the broader image being drawn? And if you are tarred as a Hindu power, then it hurts your geopolitics. It hurts your foreign policy. Look at how the BJP had to kick out its spokesperson. And this means that you have less global influence and people take you less seriously. Narratives matter. In fact, Vikram Sood's book is all about narratives. You can interview him, Kushal, next time. He's a very dear friend and he's a co-author. We've written a lot of stuff together. In fact, we wrote a big piece of over 13,000 plus words on India-China tensions. Mm-hmm. There's another piece I've written on Kashmir, which sets the facts right.
So this is an important question because I think it matters more to you. So someone has asked, how can the expat community help in changing some of these things? It's a good question. See, you are also part now technically of the expat community living over here.
I am strange. I divide time between different countries. So I'm a strange beast.
Yeah, so I think this is a very important question. Somebody has asked.
So I'll tell you very bluntly, educate your kids at a broader philosophical level. Educate your kids. Make sure they learn classical languages. Make sure they read world history. Indians are too narrowly trained. So that's at a broader philosophical level. At a practical level, more immediate level, back people who are making the difference. So I'll give you a simple example. I've not had any backing from the Indian embassy at all. Or for that matter, frankly, many Indian Americans. So read us, back us, write for us, intern with us. Some of you will not have money. Just like our social media page, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Then our content shows up in search. So, at a practical note, you've got to support the journalists and the institutions, not just us. I mean, Kushal is a great example. He's doing great work, phenomenal work. And I like his intellectually open approach. So back the people you like. Forget about the New York Times. Forget about Basharat Peer. He is going to lead a good life. He went to Colombia. He's making good money. Well done. But don't get upset if the New York Times writes bad things about you. Don't get upset. The Atlantic is backed by Steve Jobs' widow. They are fundamentally left leaning. So they will do good work on America, but on India, they will be whatever they are forever. You can't change that. And they will have to hire anglicized Indians. And most anglicized Indians are, given our history, they are people with the coconut complex or the Macaulay complex. They're always going to have an even worse view of India than someone like Sir Mark Tully. I would much rather have a discussion with Sir Mark Tully than with a real Englishman, than with someone who pretends to be an Englishman, Rajdeep Sardesai, for instance.
नहीं, वो कहते हैं ना कि one of the biggest reasons I stopped watching Hindi cinema is when it became Bollywood. Because ऐसा होता था कि वो गलती से मुंबई दिल्ली मतलब साउथ मुंबई साउथ दिल्ली में रह रहे हैं, मगर उनका जो मस्तिष्क है, उनका दिमाग जो है वो न्यूयॉर्क में होता है. तो मैं बोला यार जब मुझे ओरिजिनल पीस देख लूंगा ना, मैं हॉलीवुड देख लूंगा, मैं उसकी चीप कॉपी क्यों देखूंगा?
Exactly. Now let's go back to that point. Just look at Amir Khan and Shah Rukh Khan. Do they speak Urdu well? 14 बोलता है शाहरुख, 14 भी नहीं बोल सकता. गाना है ना 14वीं का चांद हो. I mean, he doesn't even speak Urdu well, the chap, and he is the superstar. So yeah, I'm told he's a very charming fellow. But the point is that they don't even have pride in their own language.
All right, so we're almost about to finish. So, but before we wrap things up, Atul, so how does one, because I think it's only fair that I ask you this question, so how does one access the content of the Fair Observer, and what are the ways they can support the Fair Observer?
Well, thank you for asking this question and being such a great supporter. So number one, go to fairobserver.com. You can view it on your browser. Number two, you can download the app. Number three, you can follow us on social media, which is Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn. LinkedIn will become more important, I suppose. YouTube, Instagram. All right. You can also subscribe and follow our podcasts. You'll find Fair Observer podcasts and The Dialectic. Obviously, as Kushal has shown, you can make a donation. You can become a member, annual or monthly. But even I would say, don't just make a donation. First, read us and sign up for the newsletter. First, follow us, and then, if you think our work is good enough, then back us. And yes, you can intern with us. You can volunteer for us. Remember, many of you work for big companies and they double donations. So instead of donating via our website, you can go to your own company. Google will will double whatever you give. So if you give $1, Google will double it. Sometimes they, on some days they'll triple it too. So there are a whole range of things. And if you have things to say, write, speak, join the discourse, because I don't think I alone can change the discourse. We will need a whole group. We will need the equivalent of a Sangh, and I mean the original Buddhist Sangh. I don't mean the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh. I mean the original Buddham Sharanam Gacchami, Dhammam Sharanam Gacchami, or Dharmam Sharanam Gacchami, Sangham Sharanam Gacchami. Because first you become conscious, then you start doing the right thing, and then you form a community. And we need a community. We are a community-based, community-funded, community-supported, community-written. All the authors, whether it is the young lad in Gaza or the young girl we published who's just 15 on India buying Russian oil, or it is the retired Irish Prime Minister John Bruton, or it is Ishtiaq Ahmed, the great Pakistani social scientist who's written 3 great books on Pakistan: The Garrison State, Punjab's Partition, and Jinnah. He lives in Sweden. He's a professor emeritus there. All of these people have made Fair Observer what it is, because I will never know Pakistan as well as he does. I will never know Punjab's partition as well as he does. And so the idea is we bring people with great ideas and great insights onto our platform, and we establish that credibility precisely at a time when the Atlantic or the Economist are losing theirs when it comes to the emerging economy. Yes, we are rising economically. This is our moment. Let's grab it.
Perfect. Well, guys, so you heard Atul. So before we wrap things up, first of all, Atul, thanks for coming on the podcast. अच्छा लगा आपसे मिलके Washington में, and hopefully this will not be the last time we speak. We'll be speaking regularly now on the podcast, and once again, thanks for coming over here on the Cārvāka podcast to speak with me.
Thank you, and I look forward to coming again and many times. If nothing else, my relatives will be pleased with me. I have done things which doesn't please many members in my family. I never married. I have been a bit of a bad boy. In fact, I was in Kashi and I was meeting, and this is where I always say I find stereotypes are often, incomplete. If not untrue. And I was in Kashi in Swami Sampurnanand Sanskrit Mahavidyalaya. My mother packed me off there. And so one old Panditji says, "Badi tapasya karte hain aap, Atul ji." I started laughing. I said, "हाँ पंडित जी तपस्या तो करता हूँ, पर क्या करूँ, विश्वामित्र हूँ, लंबी टांगे वाली सुनहरे बालों वाली अप्सराओं का प्रकोप छाया रहता है." And he laughed. And so basically, those of you who don't know Hindi, he said, you do tapasya, you do a lot of, you meditate a lot and focus like a laser and all that. I said, yes, but what can I do? I'm a Vishwamitra, right? Vishwamitra was a prince who turned into a sage. So I'm a Rajput trying to be a Brahmin, huh? So I said, but what can I do? Whenever there's a tall, leggy blonde who passes by, my concentration goes out of the window. I'm still struggling with that element of my life. So my relatives don't take a kindly view to that, and to many other things I do. So this, if nothing else, my appearing on the Cārvāka show will legitimize me in their eyes.
सो गुड. चलो, किसी को तो चारवाक पॉडकास्ट पसंद है, तो मेरी भी एक लाइफ की कुछ तो अचीवमेंट हो गई. एनीवेज गाइस, before we wrap things up, in the description of the podcast, whether you're watching this on YouTube or you're going to be listening to this on Spotify, iTunes, wherever the audio portals, in the description of the podcast, you will see a link to the Fair Observer Twitter handle. You will see the link to Atul's Twitter handle, so you can go follow both the Fair Observer and Atul on Twitter. Please go and follow them over there. Also,
I'm also on Koo. Let me give a shout out to Koo, our own social media platform.
बिल्कुल, कू पे भी जा सकते हैं आप, तो कू पे भी जा सकते हैं. Also, there will be a link to the Fair Observer website. Like Atul explained, you can support them. There are different ways to support them monetarily. You can also subscribe to the newsletter, and you can you can download the app. There are different ways. I have left the link to all of Atul's articles also there in the description of the podcast. So please visit fairobserver.com. As far as I'm concerned, you know the drill. You can subscribe to the Cārvāka podcast YouTube channel, or you can go on Spotify, iTunes, leave a review over there and become a regular listener over there, or Stitcher, jahan pe bhi jate ho. You can also support the podcast monetarily by becoming a member on YouTube or a member on Patreon, or by buying the podcast merch on kushalmehra.com or Kadak merch, or sending your donations through UPI. I will see you guys next time. Until then, namaste, take care, bye bye.